Okay, my name is Mark Wallum. I'm the executive director at Alba, and we're waiting. We are joining a live event. In just momentarily, we'll be joining a live event that's happening in San Francisco right now. They have just watched the film. Hopefully, everyone that's joining here online has already watched it. They watched it live together. And they have just they completed that just a few minutes ago. They're taking a short break and they're coming back together, and we're going to be joining them live very, very soon. So we're going to be talking about the film and about the topics that are raised in the film. So pretty soon you'll be seeing a live feed, and I believe Richard Burmack, who I want to acknowledge from the Bay Area, is having done a lot of work on this, and Charlie Crist, who is there. And Paul Cox, I believe, from Veterans for Peace, may be speaking. And then there'll be a panel of direct descendants of the vets who may speak about this and will be up for questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. My colleague Dennis Meany is joining me here online. Dennis, who many of you know, and he'll be kind of curating the questions, and we'll try to put some. There'll be questions, of course, from the live audience, and there'll be questions from those of us online as well. So I don't know that we'll be able to get to all of them, but I believe we're going to go for about an hour or an hour and 20 minutes for this hybrid event together. Ray Day, the director, is there also. I don't know if he'll speak, but I think if you want to put a question to him as the director, you'd be able to do that as well. So, and like I said, I think there's a panel maybe of three, four, or five of the direct descendants, I believe children of the vets. So very, very interesting film, very, very interesting event, and an interesting format because we're joining our friends in San Francisco live, and we really appreciate everyone joining us from across the country and beyond. I think we have some people here from Spain as well and other countries. That's really all I have to say. I think we're just kind of waiting now for the high sign until we know that they're ready to go on that end. Like I said, they're taking a break after the film. I think they had some refreshments and they're assembling the panel and getting ready for the speakers to talk to us. So I will, along with you, just wait until we until they speak to us live from San Francisco. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we're just about to start the next part in a few minutes. And Ray is going to come up, the person who produced the film, and he's going to say a few words. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A after the other part of the panel. So, Ray, do you want to come up?
Hello. Well, thank you. Thank you for watching the film. Thank you for purchasing the book. They are available $10 a pop, and all the proceeds go to Alba. And I'll just put this here for a second. And do you have any questions about the film? It was okay.
Where did they live?
They lived in a place called Tunitas Creek, and that's south of Half Moon Bay. What? That microphone? Well, okay. This one, okay? Okay. It's south of Half Moon Bay. It's probably about 3 miles south and maybe 2 miles east. And it's like, there's like Lobitas Creek, Tunitas Creek. And the cabin was there, and like they said, it was burned in 1988 in the winter. Oh, okay. Oh, is that okay? How is that? What's going? I mean, I've been only doing audio recording for 40 years. So, okay. Questions?
Two questions. One is your film available for people who want to see it beyond
I,
showings? And the other question is, where did you get all that amazing footage of this relatively
I didn't know Irving, but I knew his wife, and she had, I mean, take it back to the point where the fire burned the house down. The thing she grabbed was not clothing. She grabbed a dresser full of slides of his work, right? And ran out. From those slides, I put together first a website, and then I put together an outline for that book. That have to be 2004 and 5. Fortunately, the Crocker, they were building an addition to the Crocker Museum, and it was supposed to happen in 2006, and it was canceled till 2007 or 8. They had an empty space. So they suggested that we put a show for Irving there, a traveling exhibition. And that came in 2006. And he said, he saw the design for the book. He said, continue with your book. So then Halen and I raised some money, and we went all over reshooting all of his paintings, drawings, watercolors, whatever. And thanks to Alba, I was able to find Irving's photographs in his uniform and wherever. And I was really grateful for them for that. And then I got a lot of stock footage of the Spanish Civil War. And I did the primary interviews in 2007. It was Hala, Dan, the minister, and Scott Shields, the curator. Hala died in 2010. The minister died in 2011. And we were both, Dan and I were just still in tears because we miss Hala so much. He was such an incredible person. I mean, she has a story to tell just from her own life and dealing with having to be a Hitler Youth. She had a choice of helping the person who takes the spotlight and shines it on the British planes and American planes coming in. She had a choice of working in a hospital, or she had a choice of being an attendant to a streetcar. And she decided to do that. So she went to Hanover and was a streetcar attendant there in Hanover. And when Hanover was like Dresden, it got bombed to smithereens. And she survived, and she and a friend raced north to get out of Hanover when she could, because the Russians were coming in. If they found her, she would have been raped and killed. And anyway, they got to her town on that little island in the North Sea. But I mean, she had amazing experiences, just like Irving had. I mean, what you see in Irving's work is pretty much what he saw over there in Spain, the atrocities and everything. Was there a second part to that question? Yes. I just keep.
Is your film available?
Oh, right. It's on Vimeo. If you have, I can. Let's see, what can I do? If you go to irvingnorman.com, that's the website that I made. And what I can do, I think there is a link to the film there through Vimeo. If not, I'll make sure that there is one. Okay?
Okay, so
Oops.
we're going to probably have to stop the questions. We'll have more. We're going to have a Q&A later and a discussion after
Okay.
the panel, and you can raise some more questions at that point. But because we're running sort of late, and next time when we do the Q&A, we're going to have people that ask the questions or have some comments come up to the microphone. Is this mic on too? Okay. So now we're coming, and first of all, I want to thank all the people on Zoom for showing up and joining us on this. And usually it was common at the vet meetings for us to ask if there's any family members of the vets to sort of stand up or raise your hand.
We'll raise our hands.
Oh, great. And eventually, and then I'd like you all guys to offer afterwards to meet up with Charlie, because we'd like to interview all of you. And also, if you can put in the Zoom, anyone who's going to be interested, we're going to do this project. He'll tell you a little more about it at some point for the people on Zoom, in which we're trying to interview all these vets. If you can put your names in the chat as well. And also at this moment, I'd just like to take a few seconds to honor the passing of Tom Lear. Tom Lear, the great, who died this week, who is a great satirist, and he's famous for the line that Franco may have won the war, and he had all the bullets, but we had all the good songs. Okay, so I think we're going to, at this point, I know that this was a very moving film, and but we're now going to go back to the panel where you're going to hear the brighter side. You're going to hear from people that how people survived the 50s, survived the oppression, survived times that are very similar to what's happening now. So our first speaker is going to be Paul Harris.
1 minute,
He's a retired lawyer and law professor. He is president of the National Lawyers Guild and author of the critically acclaimed nonfiction book, Black Rage Confronts the Law. His father, Sidney Harris, was a longtime member of the Lincoln Brigade. Okay, Paul.
In 1937, my father-to-be, Sidney Harris, was thousands of miles from his home, where he had grown up at the Home for Jewish Orphans in Chicago. He lay in a valley in Spain, bleeding from a wound from a fascist gun. As he lay there with a fever and the night getting colder and colder, 3 peasant women found him. The older one washed his wound, bandaged his leg. The other woman got a little bit of an apple and gave it to him. And the youngest one stayed with him all night long, holding him in her arms to reduce his fever. He was 21 years old. In the morning, when she went to get help, Italian fascist troops found my father. The only reason they didn't kill him is he was from Al Capone's hometown, and they thought that was funny. He spent the next year in a prisoner of war camp. In 1953, my mom and I walked into a post office. I said, "Mommy, look, it's Uncle Fred's picture on the wall." She grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the post office. "Paulie, never talk about your uncle outside the family." My Uncle Fred was wanted. He was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He was charged with conspiring to advocate or teach, not to do any criminal act, to advocate or teach the eventual overthrow of the government by force or violence. He went into the Communist Party underground, and after 4 years, he surrendered, went to trial, and was convicted. The U.S. Supreme Court reversed his conviction on the grounds of the First Amendment's protection of the right of freedom of association. When I was 8 years old, 2 FBI men tried to get me into their car. I ran away to my grandparents. I wasn't scared. I knew we were the good guys, and it was sort of exciting. But it was awful for my family. My grandparents were hounded. My father, who was a bodyguard for Paul Robeson in Chicago, but he was blacklisted from the labor movement. He was threatened with deportation, and he spent years doing unfulfilling jobs. My mother lost job after job as the FBI would turn up at her job site and scare her employers. By 1960, things were beginning to change. I had learned that repression comes and goes, but we as a people survive. As things changed, the first progressive mayor of Chicago appointed my uncle Commissioner of Culture. My mom, when healthy, was active in organizations for peace, for nuclear disarmament, for civil rights. The media and young people had rediscovered the Spanish Civil War. So my dad's life changed. There were 2 major articles about him and the Lincoln Brigade in the Chicago newspapers. He became a well-known labor journalist and a well-known photographer. His photos are shown around the world still. My siblings scattered his ashes to that same valley where the 3 peasant women had saved his life, and when a young woman had imprinted romance on his soul. For me, I got arrested in civil rights demonstrations, co-founded a multiracial law collective where secretaries and lawyers were equal partners and got equal salaries. Taught guerrilla lawyering at 3 law schools and helped win a $4 million verdict against the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover rolled over in his grave. I learned that in troubled times, you can gain strength from this truth. When your child looks at you, she sees a person who has lived their life consistent with the principles that you have taught her.
Thank you so much, Paul. Our next speaker is Martha Olson-Jarocki. Her father, Leonard Olson, was an organizer for the National Maritime Union in the 1930s before sailing to Spain. He was wounded in 1938 at Gandesa during the Ebro Offensive. After returning to the U.S., Leonard worked as a union carpenter and was an active member of the Bay Area Veterans Post. Martha and her sister, Hannah Creighton, were also very active in the Post in the 1980s and 1990s, helping to organize several Bay Area annual VALB events and attending reunions of the International Brigades in Florence in 1976 and Spain in 1996. Martha, along with countless others, I'm sure some in this room, worked on the National Monument to the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in San Francisco, dedicated in 2007.
In Spain, my father, Leonard Olson, was in the Ebro retreats, as Charlie just said. He was caught behind enemy lines. That was in the spring of 1938, and survived 5 days before he made it back to the Republican lines. That was a time when many, many of the Lincolns were lost. A few months later, at Gandesa, he was wounded in the head. He said the fascists always aimed for the head. And wounded in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Again, the fascists, he said, also aimed at the ambulances. He spent weeks in an International Brigade hospital and was sent home from there when the Internationals left Spain. He came home with survivor's guilt and didn't talk about Spain much or about his own experiences when I was a child. It was only later, in the 1980s, when Alba began videotaping oral histories and Peter Carroll conducted a number of interviews with his comrades, that he began to talk about his own experience there. Yet he was always very open about his political life, his political ideas. He told of being radicalized at 16 when he heard Elizabeth Gurley Flynn speak to miners on the Minnesota iron ore range. My parents were both trade unionists. My mother, Jean Olson, was an office worker in the Newspaper Guild. They were both in the Communist Party in San Francisco and moved to Marin County after the war when my sister and I were young. When they moved, they left the party, and as a result, they didn't have that network when the repression started in the late 40s. They had a circle of friends, mostly people who had left the party too, writers, artists, trade unionists. And on Sunday afternoons, when the friends would all assemble, the talk was heady. I remember loving their joy and animation in those sessions, and I don't remember fear or concern. They were open with my sister and I about their ideas, but there was a pact of secrecy with the neighbors and with friends. I don't remember being told about it, but it just was. There were books in our closet that we didn't have on the shelves. And once I borrowed from my mother's small jewelry collection a beautiful red flag pin, and I wore it next door to the neighbors. And I still remember the look on her face when I came home, and there it was on my shirt. I learned later that the FBI followed my father while he worked as a union carpenter. But I only knew that sometimes he chose to work for lefty friends who were building houses on speculation, which meant that you got paid later sometimes. My mother did clerical work for movement friends, an upholsterer, and several attorneys. And in the 1960s, when things opened up a bit, she was hired as a legal secretary for the County of Marin. I was always proud of their politics and was certain they had the right ideas, and I wanted, as a kid, to do my part, to stand up to the FBI when they came to the door. Once they kicked our dog, which was shocking, and proud of my sister, who pretended she didn't know the names of any of our friends when she was interviewed by the FBI in elementary school. But I was also terrified. I was terrified for the Rosenbergs, and especially for their sons. The California Communist Party leadership was also on trial at the time. I don't remember knowing that, but I think I felt it. Now I understand that pact of silence, the silence that my family felt we needed to keep, was as damaging. It made me an outsider. It gave me a secret life. And I think for a child, those kinds of messages, those learnings are deep and very difficult to reverse. I worry now about the long-term effect of immigrant children, of families that are not documented, and how they may have to try to hide and escape from ICE raids and the effect on that. But my parents' values of working class solidarity above all else, their Marxism, their pride in their worldview, which was not diminished by the repressions of the 50s or by the Stalin revelations in 1956, also gave me something else as I came of age myself and began to think about politics. It was a kind of secret power. I had a long view, longer than my peers, and the 1960s confirmed it. In Mississippi with SNCC, there on the shelves of the Freedom House were the same books on my parents' bookshelves, Labor's Untold Story. And in 1976 in Florence, at an International Brigade reunion, the whole city turned out for the brigadistas. They cheered and wept and embraced them as heroes. There it was again, the long view. That the struggle for self-determination does not end with the battle, that solidarity is not lost, and that there will be an after the repression. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Margot Feinberg. When I first met Margot, the daughter of Helen Freeman, at a vet event, she described her mother as a lifelong activist and that she was very much her mother's daughter, or mother's child, I should say. Anyway, after the war, Helen went to Corvallis, Oregon, to provide medical aid to farm workers and later became a school nurse, serving migrant children in the poor communities in California. Margot is a longtime union lawyer representing public and private sector unions, and she is counsel to the UAW at the University of California and is presently involved in fighting Trump's endless assault on education and workers. She married Fred Ross Jr., the son of a legendary organizer, Fred Ross, who trained Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and many other organizers. That legacy is now captured in a recently premiered film, American Agitators, of which Margot is the executive producer. Margot.
And which the cinematographer is filming as we speak. So how's that for symmetry? Good afternoon. As he said, my name is Margot Feinberg. I am a proud daughter of a woman who went to Spain to see how she could make a difference. My mother was very young. She had just finished her training at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, and some friends of hers who are a little bit older asked her if she wanted to go to a meeting to hear about what was happening in Spain. So my mother thought, well, why not? The people she went with, I think she thought, had intentions of going to Spain. At the end of the meeting, her friends left, and my mother, moved by the circumstances of the people of Spain, decided to sign up and go. So at 21, in January of 1937, she sailed on a ship headed to Spain. I don't know if you know this, the people who went to Spain couldn't just drop into Spain. So they went on a cruise line to Paris and then ultimately over the Pyrenees into Spain. But so when she went to the boat, her uncle and brother, brought flowers and chocolate as if she was going off on some lovely adventure. It didn't turn out quite like that. So she was part of the very first medical battalion, was on that boat going to Spain. But she, like other members of the medical battalion, were, while completely committed, were way over their heads. None of them had been military doctors or nurses before. They had to create frontline hospitals out of nothing and figure out how to work with the people of Spain to be as assistants in these hospitals. My mother, after a year and a half of being in Spain, was injured while on a frontline hospital. I think that's an overstatement. Inside a big tent where medical procedures were being provided, when the hospital, despite the Red Cross on the top of the tent, was strafed by bombs, and she was hit. And if you saw the film Into the Fire, which you haven't, please do. Also, same cinematographer. This is the whole thing, just to promote you, Vicente. Anyhow, she was injured there. Fortunately, Dr. Barsky and others were able to provide aid to her. And after recuperating in Spain for a period of time, along with some others, well-known vets who were injured there as well, she was able to return to the United States in time the whole goal was for her in time to arrive for the rally at Madison Square Garden, where they were raising money for the people of Spain. Because of her injury, my mother was not able to go to World War II. I should tell you that she was seen by doctors who were affiliated with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, one of whom told her that she was to lose her arm. And my mother said, no, she wouldn't. That's how my uncle reported it. And no, she didn't, which really summarizes a lot about my mother. Since she couldn't go to World War II, there had just been the cessation of a war on the Ecuador-Peruvian border, and so my mother had an opportunity to go there to provide public health nursing. She was selected because she spoke Spanish. No one seemed to question how that was so, and off she went with the Rockefeller Foundation to Ecuador. After the war ended in Germany, my mother joined up to go with Joint to help the displaced persons coming out of the concentration camps. So you get the gist. My mother was both fearless and compassionate. As Richard mentioned, she did a stint in Oregon working with farm workers, and ultimately she returned to New York, where she worked in the ILGW health clinics. It was in that time, in the early 50s, that she was introduced to my father, who was a political and union organizer and ultimately health administrator. And despite, I would think, everyone thinking that my mother was a great feminist, she would say she met Charles and life began. And I think in part that was because she wanted to be a mother as well, and I am the beneficiary of that. I am and always will be one of the youngest children of the vets, which is great because I get to remain young forever, it seems, despite other things that are happening. And that's because my mother was 42 when I was born, and she was one of the youngest vets to begin with. So I guess there could be some men out there who had children afterwards. I can't speak to that. I certainly am the youngest of the women vets, daughter of the young women vets. And I say that because my experience is different than the other people on this panel. My brother and I were, I guess, by definition, red diaper babies, but really the last of them in that way. So I was a toddler in the late 50s, and so I didn't experience some of the things that others here did. And while my father was blacklisted and my mother was questioned, that never really became something that stopped them about how they acted and went through the world. They lived their values. They were committed to that on a large and small scale, whether it was how they treated the person in the restaurant or the work they chose to do or other things that they could contribute. I have been a union labor lawyer since 1981. I joined the Lawyers Guild when I was in law school when I went to a convention where Paul Harris was the president, and I was inspired by him, so more symmetry in this room as well. I continue to do that work. And though I have been doing this work for many years and been in the battle, I do feel like we are in a very different time right now. It feels viscerally different. And as Richard said, I represent the unions at the University of California, the graduate students, the postdocs, the academic researchers, all of whom are under major attack, both because they're international scholars, because they do science, because they speak out about what's going on in the Middle East. And for all those reasons, they are under relentless attack by the Trump administration. So I feel fortunate. I'm not off to Spain, but I feel fortunate that every day I wake up and I feel like I can do something to make a difference. And I feel like every day I feel like we should wake up and do something to make a difference. I have been in this active thing since the 70s. When I was at Berkeley myself as an undergrad, I was part of the anti-apartheid movement. As even a high schooler, I had a table in New York City for the National Peace Action Committee. So my parents supported all those things. When we were arrested at Berkeley, everyone else panicked, and I said, don't worry, my parents will bail us out. Though I have to say they were still afraid, and sometimes my mother would tell me not to do something, and then I would pull the card, but you went to Spain. And she would say, those were different times. And off I would go. I think that what distinguishes the members of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which I think we need to tap into in the moment that we're in, is that those who went to Spain, and the ones that I knew, had a certain level of hope and optimism that kept them going. Many of them, certainly the nurses that I knew, went on to do many other great things after their time in Spain. Spain was the first chapter amongst many incredible chapters. And I feel like my mother and these other nurses served as a role model. They were the early feminists, and they may not have been called that, but they were independent, and they took action, and I'm appreciative of that. My own mother actually was very subdued in the way she conducted herself, but fearless. And I think of this moment and what we could do, and I don't know that I would have the courage to do what she did, which was to get on that boat and go to Spain. But they taught us a lot of things, and I'm hoping that, as I sit here today, I think I may be using, has my card been called on me? I don't want to run out my time. But my parents and their call, and bore the brunt of the McCarthy era, as I said. They were strangely dubbed premature anti-fascists, as you know. Recently at a march, I wore a sign that said premature anti-fascists, and I crossed out the pre. We need to do more education. Nobody got it. Someone said, "Oh, you don't look that old." I was like, "Oh, never mind." Anyhow, my mother was always very open about her time in Spain. There was no whispering in our household. Maybe it's because of, as I said, because of my age. My mother was the commander of the Southern California Post. We often went to brigade events in Southern California, originally in New York, and then later up here. Our lives were integrated with other people who had gone to Spain and were parts of other movements. So there was never any question. My parents took us to Washington, to march, to New York, to wherever we needed to be. And I'm very appreciative of that. I would say that the FBI did come knocking. I once got my mother's FBI file. The way it read was this. It will remind you of the doctor's office visit. The FBI came, they knocked on her door. My mother opened the door. She says, "What is it?" They said, "We'd like to talk to you." And she said, "Oh, sorry, not interested," and closed the door. I guess she thought it was the Fuller Brush Man or something, I don't know. But it literally says that in her file, and that was the end of that. So, so much for grit and determination. But what I wanted to end on was a particular thing that I've become aware of about resiliency. My grandparents survived the Tsar in Russia and came to this country. What you may not know is my mother both lost her parents in the influenza epidemic, one when she was 4 and one when she was 12. She was raised by her aunt and uncle. She went to Spain, she was injured and almost lost her arm, but my mother's story was never the story of all those horrible things that happened to her. It would be about all the things she did. And I think that optimism which carried her through, and which carries through me and my family, I think that's key. Recently, my brother lost his home in the Altadena fires. And he was very calm. At first, I thought it was shock. And then he was just very calm. He says, "I have a job, I have insurance, I will go on." And much like in the movie about that artist, it was fascinating. So for many years, I knew of this concept called generational trauma, which many people suffer. And I feel that I am the beneficiary of generational resilience. And I think I may have known that, but when I saw it in my brother, it was like, oh, this is what's happening here. Recently, I lost my husband, and we're living in very difficult times, and yet I feel like we must continue to hope. So on that, I end with that. I subscribe to the Fred Ross Sr. axiom, which is, to inspire hope, you must have hope yourself, and so I do.
Thank you, Margot. Our next speaker is Marcy Rubin. Her adopted father, Hank Rubin, was attached to the American Medical Bureau in Spain and helped set up the first field hospitals capable of conducting blood transfusions and other life-saving procedures. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hank joined the U.S. Army for a second fight against global fascism. Later in life, Hank became a restaurateur, a pioneer of the Berkeley gourmet food movement, and the author of the 1997 book, Spain's Cause Was Mine.
Margot, I have this vision that my father and your mother were together in those field hospitals because he was the one who helped develop the in-field blood transfusion. So.
And so that's lovely.
I'm going to start from a different place. My mom, Lillian, was involved in the New York Communist Party in the 40s. She remained politically active when we moved to Los Angeles in the 50s. In 1958, following a divorce, she sought employment. She was highly qualified, and employment agencies throughout the city were eager to place her. She was hired as an administrative assistant to the vice president of an electronics firm. Lil said, "I cannot pass a security clearance." The VP said, "Don't worry, we want you. You're exactly who I need to help me." 2 days after being hired, the FBI came to the door with a huge book. It looked like the LA phone book, back when we had phone books. They listed every event and meeting she had been in New York in the 40s, including meetings where there were maybe 5 or 6 people that she thought she knew well. She wondered who the informant was. The next day, the person who hired her was nowhere to be seen. There was a letter on her desk firing her. When she contacted the employment agencies, their response was, "Thank you very much. We'll call you. Don't call us." She was blacklisted after the official blacklisted ended. We lived in a very close progressive community in LA. I actually thought everybody was lefty. I didn't actually understand to some extent that there were other people. My mom's friends rallied and within days found her a job. At that time, the left-wing communities in LA and the Bay Area were also very close. Everybody was back and forth. My father was considered to be my soon-to-be father, the most eligible bachelor in the left. And a lot of friends were enamored of my mom, so they plotted to introduce them. So Lil and Hank met, fell in love, and we moved to Berkeley when I was 13. That's when I learned about the Lincoln Brigade. I learned that the heroes who fought fascism abroad were considered traitors at home. When he returned from Spain, the government took Hank's passport. It took him 25 years before the government issued him a new one. It was difficult to get Hank to talk about Spain. He wanted to live in the present. He did not see himself as a hero for what he did yesterday. What he was doing today was more important. It was an incredibly strong message to me about staying involved and active and looking forward. Hank went to Spain out of a deep sense of principle. It was the right thing to do. Both he and my mom carried that sense of principle out in everything they did. The importance of doing what's right, even if not popular, even if there might be negative consequences, was instilled in me from the early years. And it was not just about having principles, but rather how one acts on them. In his restaurants, Hank voluntarily ran a union shop. In 1965, he hired the first black waiter in a Class A restaurant in the Bay Area, even though in Berkeley, it meant he would lose business. He also, to my mom's and my chagrin, because we were the feminists who didn't think of this, hired the first woman wait staff in a Class A restaurant, fully integrating everything. That strong commitment to principle served me well when after law school, I was hired as a lawyer in corporate America. It was not what I had planned to do as my job. But I felt strongly grounded with my parents' principles. In my corporate world, it was easier to stand up against an action I thought morally wrong than to face my mom and dad and explain why I didn't. They made it easy for me to do the right thing. And I think we all need to make it easy for everybody else to do the right thing. Looking back, the thing that I remember most about the 50s was the hush that often came over a room. Somebody would mention something that maybe they shouldn't have said, and everybody would look around to see who was there. There were active informants. No one knew who they were. I learned not to ask about people who were no longer around. I knew not to ask what people did. It was a time when books disappeared from coffee tables. As a counterpart to that paranoia, I also remember a strong sense of safety in the progressive community, whether it was friends finding mom a job or taking care of me after school while she worked. I had a cadre of aunties. I learned how important it is to have strong communities that take care of each other in traumatic times. Communities that foster the resilience we need as we again fight fascism in these new dark times.
Thank you, Marcy. Okay, so our next speaker is Cecilia London. Her father, Harold London, fought in the Battle of Belchete and was wounded in Vernetti. He attended Commonwealth College. Okay, we're having some microphone problems, but okay, is this one working? Okay, yeah, it's also with the Zoom, there's a little confusion. All this technology sometimes can get out of hand. Anyway, but we won't let it get us down.
Working now.
It's working now, great. Now I forgot what I said. Okay, he attended the Battle of Belchete and was wounded in Vernetti. He attended Commonwealth College and was active in the Communist Party and an organizer in a GE plant, which led to him being blacklisted and harassed by the FBI. In response, her parents concealed their activist past to Cecilia and her sister while they were growing up. Cecilia became a social worker working with AIDS patients, and she was involved in the Livermore Action Group. Cecilia.
Hello. My situation's a little different than everyone's, because everyone else is here, rather. Because growing up, I knew nothing about Spain and my parents' activism. My dad was very depressed, unfortunately. He was blacklisted, but luckily he did have a job. But he was undervalued and not appreciated at his job. He was really afraid to leave that job. My mother did work, which was necessary, and she was a truant officer for the school district in Philly, but did not lose her job, which was quite excellent at the time. But my dad would come home most nights with a scowl on his face. He was really hard to be around. Unfortunately, there was a lot of tension in our house, but we also had some good moments of joy, sometimes around him, if not with him. We lived with our grandparents, so we had a nice full house of people. When I was maybe 8 in 1954, I saw the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I was sure that my parents had been taken over, as probably they were acting very strange and zombie-like. It was a good way to try to understand the time, and so I went there, and I really do love science fiction to this day. Also about this time, one morning, as I was saying goodbye to my dad in the living room, I was about to go to school, and he was standing straight up, and he went boom, flat over to the ground. He fainted. He was having a nervous breakdown, and he was hospitalized. I found out years later that the FBI had been coming to our house and his work and pressuring him to go back into the party and be a spy. After the nervous breakdown, they did leave him alone. I never saw the FBI, but my sister said she did, or she saw men and later assumed that's who they were. Finally, when I was 13 and my sister 16, our parents sat us down at the kitchen table and told us all about Spain and their Communist Party past. They had told us they met at a party that nobody else came to. The actuality was that they really met at a Communist Party meeting that nobody else showed up at. We were told not to tell anyone, but of course I did, because I thought it was really cool, but only my really close friends. We did not live the activist life growing up. My parents were smart, liberal Jews. They called themselves intellectuals. My dad had gone to Commonwealth College in Arkansas, a very lefty college. He rode the rails in the 1930s. He was very active in the Philadelphia Communist Party chapter and attempted to organize the Communist Party at the GE plant. This led to him being blacklisted in the 50s and later. They never went to marches or involved with any political activity that I knew. They were too frightened, unfortunately. Additionally, my mother's father, my grandfather, who we lived with, a socialist and active in the workman's circle, was sent to Siberia when he was 15. He was handing out leaflets during the 1905 revolution. Amazingly, he escaped in the spring thaw, made it back to Odessa, and then his father, with a lot of difficulty, sent him to Philadelphia to be with his relatives in 1906. He was 16 then. And when my dad went to Spain, he was only 21. These were young, brave men. I was lucky because of the socialist workman's circle. I went to their wonderful workman's circle camp, Camp Hoffnung, outside of Philly. I have never really thought of myself as a red diaper baby. I'm kind of a pink diaper baby. I was brought up by smart, politically astute parents who never discussed their radical beliefs or took action. They discussed their politics, but they did not veer towards communism. Socialism was okay to talk about. They appeared to be good liberal Democrats with good values imparted to myself and my sister. I was not particularly politically active as a young adult. I went to the usual anti-war rallies in Washington. My parents did not go. But when I was in college, I was debating whether to go to an SDS meeting. I chickened out, unfortunately. I didn't have a friend to go with, and I also felt that my parents and grandparents had done a lot more than I could ever do politically. I was also shy then, and maybe I had absorbed some of my parents' fears. In the 1980s, I became more politically active. I joined the Livermore Action Group and was a member of 2 different affinity groups for 2 different actions. The first group was documented in the film Stopping History by Peter Adair. The second group was the Nuclear Beauty Parlor. This time, I got arrested and spent 3 nights in jail. This group of artistic women went on to write a song that was recorded. We performed political theater in San Francisco. We were featured in Ms. Magazine and have a Wikipedia page. We're famous, in quotes. We are still a group that does political action together. 6 of us went to Arizona for Get Out the Vote in the 2022 midterms. My political work also manifested in my professional career. I'm a retired medical social worker and was on the home health HIV team in the 1990s. That work with all those beautiful young men who died was a political action. The men were shunned by society, and we were there on the front lines providing the care. Over the years at work, I was the one who announced in staff meetings that the emperor had no clothes. We tried to organize a union that failed. I wrote petitions. I wrote letters over the years to the management. I was the shit sticker, as you could say. Also, at that time in 80s, 90s, I volunteered for the Bay Area Veterans Abraham League and Brigade chapter because I was going to the yearly meetings, and I provided social work support to the aging vets and their families. There are a lot of family genes running through me that say fight, participate. My sister has them too. She was a Kennedy delegate. Find the right page. Sorry. To the 1980 convention and was active in local politics in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Last year, my husband, daughter, and daughter-in-law and some of our friends went to Milwaukee for Get Out the Vote. It didn't work, but we tried. I still write postcards, make calls, and go to lots of marches and rallies. Also, I went to Washington for the huge Women's March in 2017. I am not slowing down. I definitely overcame my shyness, and I found the confidence that can come from fighting for one's beliefs with a group, as my father did. And unfortunately, we really, really need to fight now, which we all know. This is my sign that I take to marches, if you can see it. My father didn't fight fascism in Spain for this. And it gets some interesting, it's ignored a lot because people don't the younger people don't know what I'm talking about. But some older people do. And at the 2017 march, I had a similar sign in Washington for the Women's March. There were some lovely people from Spain who came up and hugged me. It was really charming. It was lovely. As an addendum, my dad did finally get good, satisfying jobs over the years. He died young, however, in 1969 at the age of 74 of acute leukemia. It was very quick, and when he was diagnosed, he said he hoped he'd be lucky as he had been in Spain at the Battle of Brunete, where he was wounded in the leg. He said, but all the men around him died. He wasn't lucky this time, unfortunately. Thank you.
I would just like to say I want to thank Cecilia, and that actually Cecilia is a recent member of our group. Well, anyway, this sign, I went to a demonstration, I think it was the No Kings Day or one of those, and I saw this sign here, and I came up to her and said, oh, and I told her about our group, and she got involved. So now,
Union Square, right?
the what? Yeah, in the Union Square.
Yeah. March.
So now we're about to open this up. If there's any kids of the vets here who would like to come up and say something, and we're going to start it off with Carolyn Berry, who has kind of a unique story from the international perspective. I'll let her, and you have to come up to the mic when you speak. So if there are people who want to speak, if they would like sort of want to line up over there. Okay, so make sure you speak from this mic.
Yes, I'm a little short for this. Oh. Okay.
Did it.
Thanks, Charlie. That's perfect. I was not a member, my father was not a member of the Lincoln Brigade because he was Swedish. And I didn't even know about my father until I was 40 years old. He was a Swedish seaman and a communist, and he went to fight in Spain with the German Talman Brigade. After the Spanish Civil War, during World War II, he became the ombudsman for the Swedish and Norwegian Seamen's Union, which had its headquarters at that time in San Francisco. And that is when he met my mother folk dancing at the San Francisco Labor School. That's where they met, and they had, I think, a year-long affair, which resulted in me. But they split up before I was born, and they each married other people. So after World War II, the beginning of the McCarthy period, the FBI began harassing and hounding my mother because my father was still in this country fighting deportation. Our government wanted to deport my father. They actually threw him in jail, and the Swedish consul general bailed him out the same day so that he could attend a black-tie dinner at the Swedish consulate, because he was actually a hero to the Swedish, because he was helping to protect Swedish and Norwegian shipping from the Nazis. But of course he was not to our government. He was a communist, and the FBI frightened my mother so much with their harassment that she, at that time, broke all contact with my father. And I didn't know about him until many years later, when she had the onset of Alzheimer's disease, and she must have known she was losing her memory. And she didn't want to go to her grave with this huge secret, and she told me about my father. And at first, I didn't believe her. But I went to Martha's parents, who were like my aunt and uncle, Jean and Leonard Olson, told them, asked them, do I really have a father in Sweden? And they said, you might. And we are going to the reunion of the International Brigades in 1986. Why don't you write him a letter, and we will bring it and try to find him. So they went, they found him, they gave him the letter from me with some photographs I enclosed. And within a few weeks later, immediately I got a letter back from my father with 2 tickets to Stockholm to go see him. So my daughter and I flew there. We got reunited with him. It was wonderful. I got to know him. I visited him every year for 10 years until he passed away from cancer in 1997. And I think I've always supported progressive causes, probably because of the way I was raised. And getting to know my father, he always stayed active in progressive political events in Sweden and actually throughout the world. He always gave the speech in Stockholm downtown at the famous La Mano sculpture. He was the one who gave the May Day speech there. And I'm just very proud of him. I think he was proud of me. I have, like I say, supported liberal causes, gone on lots of marches. When I found out about him, I became more active with the VLB, even though he wasn't a Lincoln. But I'm very proud of him and my heritage. Thank you.
So any other kids of vets who would like to say anything?
Our grandkids.
Sure. Okay, well, before we do that, then that'll be our next thing, grandkids, and we'll have an open discussion. I'd just like to ask the panelists one thing, which was that it was said in some of our discussions before, that what allowed people to come through was that they had this sort of secret power, and that was knowing that we were right, and that gave them resilience. Would people like to comment about that on the panel or discuss that? You know, we have these really lively discussions. And
I think I have resilience.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Part is from my family, for sure, what my father and grandfather did. But I think a lot of it is from being 79 years old, loving the work I did, having a wonderful family, and becoming a strong feminist woman. So it's all mixed up. But it didn't hurt having my beginnings and my parents, that's for sure.
Well, let me ask a different. So what do you think we should tell the younger generation that can give them, from our experience, that will take with them to guide them through these rough years that are coming ahead?
I'll tell you what I tell my students is that fundamental social change is a long process. I was in Berkeley in the 60s. I have many peers who thought the revolution was coming in 2-3 years, for it didn't come. Tremendous social change came, but the revolution didn't. So they became either burnt out from all the work they did, or they became cynical and dropped out. When we set up our law collective, we worked 4 days a week, 7 days when we were in trial, but 4 days a week. One of the secretaries used the time to go back to college. Another lawyer used the time to teach at a law school. I stayed home with my firstborn child, which was much more difficult during the day than being a lawyer. But we did it specifically so we would not burn out, because we were in it for the long haul. Repression comes and goes. We have to resist. But what's happening now, I tell my young people, it'll be gone too, as long as you resist.
I think in there, too, it's in addition to be long, it's really important to look historically at how many other societies have dealt with incredibly repressive regimes and have come through those. It's something that we have never experienced here, but I take great hope, and my optimism comes from thinking about those and thinking about everything from a Germany that came out of Hitler and came out of the war. But if you look around, whether it was Rwanda and what happened after the genocide, or you could just go through. We have a whole social history in this world of repression and then people coming through. So I would tell people to think about that, but the other thing is you need to act. We need to be out there. Everybody's going to find a different way of acting, but silence is acquiescence.
Okay, I'm going to add a little bit about that. I actually think we have lived through some I know you didn't mean that we didn't, some very repressive times in our own country. So I'm going to commend you to see this film, American Agitators, and the reason is because it has a whole arc of history of our country, and where good organizing made a difference even in the darkest of times. And I truly believe that, much like in the Ross legacy. But for one example, during the Japanese internment that we had in this country, one of our darkest times, we did come through it. Some of the people who were imprisoned during those times went on to become some of the greatest civil rights lawyers, and actually helped found the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in the state of California. And so you can see the arc of how that dark time created other opportunities. And just last week, when I turned on the TV, one of the women who I know, because she's in our film, whose family was in one of a very harsh, well, they were all harsh detention camps, is now out protesting along with other Japanese Americans in front of the Dublin detention camps because they see the arc. And I feel like those are opportunities. The other I would say, which is how I live my life, is that we do live in dark times. When I was in law school, Ronald Reagan was elected, then Duke Majan, then Pete Wilson. It seemed like there weren't a lot of opportunities. I didn't realize that this was coming, but let's just say there were dark times. And you have to find where you can make change, where you can write a law, where you can organize workers. And I think that those things exist today. And I see that people are finding ways to protest, to litigate, to come together, to do small things, which is just to help the immigrant who's being taken down the street or standing in the Home Depot parking lot. But I think there are things for us to do, and in the end, that will make the difference. And so I continue to have hope, because what is the alternative? There is no alternative to hope.
Okay, I think it's time for one of our grandkids. And we want to thank her for being a timekeeper. She sort of just stepped right up to something. And if you want to talk through.
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Karen. Harold London was my grandfather, and Cecilia is my aunt. So it was kind of interesting to see this, because we have a little bit different perspective, because we're a different generation, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, and although they didn't talk a lot about being part of the Communist Party at all, and they didn't talk about that, but I know my grandmother, Gertrude London, was very involved in the Philadelphia Teachers Association in the Union. My mother was very involved in the union. She had me on the picket line when I was 3 years old, because I didn't have daycare for that day. And the sign was taller than I was, so I was like tripping over the sign as I was getting eggs thrown at me, and we were screaming, "Scab, scab, scab." That's what I remember when I was 3.5 years old. So I think, although they didn't talk a lot about the communism and being blacklisted so much, they were still very involved in more socially acceptable avenues of protest, is what I remember. But what I remember most is that in 1991, I lived with my grandmother after my grandfather had passed away, and I was staying, it was right after I graduated college, so this was many years ago. So in 1991, I was in the back bedroom, and I was just fumbling through some stuff, and I found this Rolodex. And I brought it to her, and I'm like, "What is this?" And she started to shake. She was terrified. She looked at me, she said, "You take this right now, and you throw it out 3 apartment buildings over." And it was the list of all the communist partnership that he had. And that's how my grandfather got his job. That's probably how she got her job. And she was just so terrified. And just that she kept that with her all those years. And she didn't fight in Spain, but she was very much involved in the Communist Party, since they met at the Communist Party to become husband and wife. But that is the trauma that is often pushed down. And I'm also a VA nurse, and I take care of veterans for 18 years. And then they might not talk about it, but it doesn't mean they're not carrying it with them. So that's what I took with me from that. So.
Thank you very much. So at this time, we're going to open up to questions in the audience here, and then also the Zoom audience. So if anybody wants to ask the panelists anything or start a discussion, just feel free. We got about 10 minutes left, so.
90.
1991, I graduated. 1990.
The question in the back.
Yeah. Paul, do you want to come up and? Yes, we do. We have books for sale here, and the proceeds go to Alba. We have Richard Burmack's book and Ray Day's book as well on Irving Norman. $10. Oh, is that correct? Yeah. Which is a really crazy deal. So. Yep, and the money goes directly to Alba. Yeah. So, any questions or any last thing that you guys want to wrap up with?
The Zoomers are behaving? They're not asking
I
questions?
think the Zoomers are behaving. Yeah, I don't think.
Gosh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it's a good case. Yeah. No, Paul's not available for questions anymore, but yeah, it was great while we had him.
We were happy to have Paul. You know, he has a few little health issues in terms of can't sit down for too long, and so he had to leave a little early.
There's a question in the back. She had her.
Yeah. Do you mind coming up to read it, or do you want me to?
Barbara, can you come up and read?
Just so the Zoom
I'd like
audience
you to
can
come
hear
up and
it.
talk
Yeah.
so that the Zoom audience can see it.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
I know you can do this, Barbara. And
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to see how values and activism comes down through the generations. But I look at all of the marches I've been going to, and I look around this room, and I look at who the people are who knock on doors in the Central Valley, and they all look like me. They have white hair. I mentioned that I represent the unions at the University of California. And last week alone, I was at a meeting at the UAW where there were 600 active graduate student postdocs. And you may remember their activity during Gaza, but their own strike of 50,000 strong in 2022. And they're very active, and they're just emblematic of what's happening, I think, across the country. Sometimes we may not see it at the rally or something we go to, but I do believe that there is a resurgence of young people who are active on a whole host of issues. And if you just saw what happened in New York, and a lot of that is due to young activism that is changing perhaps the political landscape of New York City. And if you see who was out in the streets of Los Angeles opposed to the National Guard or assisting the people in Oxnard, I was just in Oxnard, there are a lot of young people who are involved. Do there need to be more young people involved? Yes. Do there need to be young people of all ages involved? Yes. But it may be the world that, that maybe things are too bifurcated or trifurcated that we don't all see each other, but I would not despair. I think that there are a lot of the next generation and the generation after that who are, in fact, at this one thing I went to 2 weeks ago, several of the questions came from teenagers who wanted to know how their high school could participate in speaking up against ICE. So okay, I guess that's my theme for this evening. I continue to have hope.
And you always said that optimism is your secret weapon. It's Cecilia.
Exactly, exactly.
Just briefly, the No Kings March was a lot of young people. We were not, the older people were not, definitely not the majority. So that was a really strong group of people of all ages and lots of young people. And they're the ones who, of course, don't know what my sign is talking about at all. They don't know nothing.
I also think that our ways of struggle are different generationally, our ways of protest, and that we need to be more understanding of that for young people as well. I'm not sure, I'm not really a social media person, I don't do that stuff too much, but I know that, I think there are movements among those, young people that we maybe don't recognize and we can support, particularly with these stories. But yes, I hope.
Great. I just want to thank everybody for attending here. Actually, maybe I should move over. I just want to thank everybody for attending. And we put on this event, and remember ALBA, if anybody feels like donating to them, it's just albavalve.org, or you can just Google ALBA. Anyway, or Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives. We still have books for sale as a donation to ALBA. These wonderful catalogs that Ray did of the work you saw up there. And I have my book of photos of the, his books are $10 or a donation. Mine are a donation of photos of the vets. Okay, anyway, thank you, everyone. And,
Thank you.
We'll keep up the struggle. No pasaran.